Welcome to our podcast and videocast this week with head football coach Beau Baldwin. It's brought to you by Cheney Federal Credit Union, serving their members' financial needs since 1951. First off, today, Coach Baldwin, honored by the American Football Coaches Association as the Region 5 Coach of the Year for FCS schools, I should say. So congratulations for that. Long overdue, probably.
Well, I don't know about that, but a lot of great coaches, and staffs, and that's what I wanted to, allude to is whenever you're quote unquote a coach of the year, especially in our sport, there's so many moving parts and it's a staff of the year. And it's also a team of the year, really, because I told the players that you can direct them all you want, you can come up with these great plans, but they got to be out there doing it and getting it done. So proud of the staff and the work that goes into that type of honor, and proud of the players in terms of helping towards something like that nationally.
We are in rumor season, and we're going to be in rumor season as long as you're the head coach at Eastern Washington University. So how do you deal with it with the players? Because with social media, maybe 10 years ago, guys would not hear stuff like that. But with social media, it's all over the place. So how do you deal with it with the kids?
In a weird way, because it's all over the place, it's almost easier than it was 10 years ago. Because if you heard something 10 years ago, you felt like, holy cow, I never hear anything, and I heard this. Now, they hear everything. They've heard it for, last year, the year before, whether, and it doesn't matter if anything's valid or not. They hear it, so they get used to just being numb to it, unless we talk about something as a team. So you saw it last week. I mean, it was going on before last weekend's games, and our coaches, our players went out there and just played, not worried about things that they don't control that happen in social media. And so I don't really have to say much of anything to the team.
Let's talk about the game on Saturday, because a win against Montana, second time you had to face these guys this year. So obviously that's difficult because you know them, they know you. How difficult was it?
I think it definitely is difficult. I just think it's difficult, every year playing a team like Montana, whether it be Montana State, other great teams in our program or in our conference. But it's, in terms of the difficulty, I don't even think it's necessarily that much more difficult just because it was the second time in a year. I just think it's difficult every year because they're familiar foes, and we're difficult for them too because you're a familiar foe. So a lot of times you get in closer battles within your conference. I heard Baylor talking about that in different schools. Bryles was talking about that, and some of the battles you get in after teams have gotten used to, especially if staffs stay together. If staffs stay together and you have veteran players on the team, that have played against Cooper Cup now a couple of years or played against Vernon now for 3 years, everything just gets a little bit closer. So I think it was difficult and a challenge for both sides because it was our second game of the year, but I think it's always difficult when you have especially when you start getting veteran players that have seen each other and veteran coaches every year in and year out with familiar foes in your conference.
This was not a typical Eastern win in that there wasn't 300, 400 yards passing and spectacular catches and things like that. You kind of had to grind out that victory. I thought it was you out-physicaled a very physical team.
I felt like that too. I was so proud of our guys for accomplishing that because Montana is. They pride themselves on being a physical team. They are a physical team. You saw it all year on film, so it's not as if it's not a knock in any way. But I thought in that game we were able to do some things from more of a physical standpoint. There's no question, and they did too. I mean, they got TFLs and they had some sacks, and it was a battle both ways. But in terms of you talk about running the football, that's a big deal. Both your rush defense and your rush offense, and how those held up. And I think we ended up almost 90 yards more. Something else I look at is our ball carriers, not quarter. You take the QB out of it. That's a different animal when either Jordan or Vernon are carrying it. But our running backs carried the ball 31 times. Their running backs carried the ball 13 times. And that kind of shows you a little bit of how the flow of the game was going with what each offense was trying to do and what we were able to do physically. And then, it showed up at different places on special teams as well and things of that nature. So I was really proud of our guys because that's not easy to do against a Montana team. And I thought that was one of the edges in the game.
They were number one in the conference, plus 16 in turnover margin. You guys are plus 9, which isn't coming into the game is not bad either. But for the second time this year, you turned them over, 3 turnovers, a block punt, close to having another turnover that was overruled by the officials. You guys did a great job in that, and was that maybe the key to the game?
Yeah, you could look at that as being It probably was number one. I wouldn't even say probably, it was. I mean, I look at a lot of things. We scored 2 touchdowns early in the red zone. They had 2 field goals. Our third down, fourth down percentage was better. It was all those situational things. It showed up because it was a battle in a lot of areas, but then those situational areas, red zone, third down, turnover margin, a play on special teams, a big play, those all became the factors. So whether that turnover margin is up there near the top, yeah, you could probably say it is. But 2 of them were somewhat meaningless. I shouldn't say meaningless. The one at the end that iced it, we may still win without that. We're still up 10. And the one at the end we threw, we may still. But overall, I think it definitely was a factor early on, especially when you add the block punt, because that's almost that's almost another turnover in that regard. It definitely was something that we've worked on. Our guys have just bought into the idea that was a little bit of a weakness for us early. And they bought into that. We're 2-0 or 3-1 or whatever our record was, but here, folks, are some weaknesses. Even though we're off to a solid start with our only loss being to UW, we go over that stuff hard in meetings, and have that mentality to respond after wins. And that was a weakness for us early in the year. We were not in the plus, I think 3, 4, 5 games in, and our guys have worked on it. We work on it in practice. Our coaches are drilling it. We're doing things to, one, take care of the ball better on offense. Knock on wood, 0 fumbles, which is huge, and that was something we struggled with. And then on defense, creating turnovers and flying around. So proud of the guys for making huge strides through the year in that department.
6 block kicks now this year, and the guys, for the most part, that are blocking them are your defensive starters. And so these guys, are they taken, or have they come to you and said, we want to play on special teams, or is that just something that you guys have asked of them over the years?
We've pushed it over the years, and we've maybe pushed it to another level this year. You saw Cooper Kupp back there with Shaq Hill returning kicks. You see guys on kickoff cover running down there. Whether it be we were even going to possibly mix Shaq Hill into the mix, back running down kicks again, because he did that a lot as a freshman. Kendrick Bourne out there, and obviously the block punts with Sampson and Zylstra and Ronnie Hamlin and all the guys that have done that and block kicks. But our mentality, and we try and really live it, is not to say, well, we got to be careful. We don't want to lose guys on special teams. So I'm like, my feeling is special teams, it's a one-play series. It is a one-play series. You think about that one play on that punt. That was 60 to 70 yards of field position right there on that one play. So why not rest him on a 2nd and 10 on defense if we really want to rest him for a play? And that's how we look at it, in terms of, well, we can't, you can only, if we have a certain snap count, let's not take away those 4 or 5 huge plays that they can make on special teams. Let's take away 4 or 5 plays on offense or defense if we really believe that he's too tired to be able to do that. And I think when you really break it down and think about that, you get out of that nervousness as a coach about having your starters out there, and we let it rip with those guys. If they fit on special teams, they're going to be out there, and if they need breathers in other areas, we'll rotate guys in on O or D.
And does it make a difference, punt versus kickoff? Because it looks to me the more violent collisions are on the kickoffs and the kickoff coverage, kickoff return, whichever, than it is on the punt.
There are definitely more violent collisions in those 2 areas. Punt is less violent for the most part, unless you get caught on a punt cover with a peel back block situation. That's where it can, that's where some violence can occur in that regard. So yeah, I mean, you still think about it a little bit, but even with those, collision areas, I mean, we've put some guys out there on kickoff cover at times. We definitely have, and definitely on kick return, we've amped up some guys. With Cooper Kupp back there and Zach Johnson occasionally, in that spot, and certain guys that are important for us. But you also still want to mix in your depth too, because you want those guys to own. Maybe I'm not playing as much, so it's a fine line. It's a mixture of both. But I think if you go all one way, none of my starters are going to be out there. You do 2 things. You don't necessarily put the best 11 out there for those special teams units, and you don't necessarily send the message that you're trying to say. You're saying one thing, but you're not sending the message to the guys. So when you have those guys out there, you're also sending a message to the guys. Yeah, it really is important. They're willing to put so-and-so out there, so-and-so, but all the while, you still want to mix in those role guys, so they're part of the whole big picture as well.
Illinois State this week in the quarterfinals. When you get to this point in the season, you're going to be playing a good team.
Very good. I mean, they are. And we said that last week. I joked about it. We start breaking down film Thursday and Friday, in terms of watching the initial breakdown stuff. Well, going into this game, you don't know who that's going to be. going into the Montana game, you didn't know who your next opponent was going to be. So Coach Sawyer, I remember him saying it too. He was in there on Friday morning doing some stuff with both Northern Iowa and Illinois State. Came in and he said, "Boss, we're going to play a good team next week." And I go, "Well, who are we going to play?" And he goes, "It doesn't matter." Basically saying these are two good teams I'm breaking down. So that was the first thing out of his mouth. So I said, well, then let's go earn the right to try and, to do that. Because at the time it was still Friday before we play in Montana. So we just, our mindset is we know that's going to be the case. We understand that. We embrace that. And we know, they're saying the same thing. And we feel very good. Now, granted, we want to keep working and keep getting better, but we're here for a reason as one of the top 8. They're here for a reason as one of the top 8, and now let's go let her rip.
And you had this matchup in 2012. You beat them here on the Inferno. They still have the same coach. They still have, I think, most, if not all, the same staff. A lot of their key players were guys that played in this game, but 2 guys that did not were their quarterback and their running back, and they're both dynamic players.
They are very dynamic, different that way than they were, in terms of that. Their running back is steady, too, not just dynamic, but steady. A guy, I think he has over 300 carries and a ton of yards, and then their quarterback's he's got some dynamic ability to him. Yeah, and when we faced that, in the playoffs a little bit before, definitely with Jacksonville State and what that quarterback was, can do. So we know how that goes, facing Prukop, and different guys in our conference that can do that as well. So we've seen those type of players, but at the same time, that also tells us, yep, we know how difficult it's going to be, and those 2 guys make it go offensively, but they don't have any weak spots. So you don't want to give those 2 guys credit and take away. They don't have weak spots. Their O-line is 300 plus, I think, all the way through. Besides the center, so they've got some great size up there and great ability. It's not just size without ability, and receivers that can make plays. So they're a strong offense, no question.
Yeah, their guards and tackles average 6'5", 320 pounds. They've got their quarterback in the last 2 games has thrown for over 700 yards and 7 touchdowns, and so he's starting to, he didn't come in until late July, early August into this program, transfer out of Indiana, so he's a guy that's, getting probably a little bit more comfortable as the year goes on, not only with the offense, but with his receivers, and they've got, kind of an eclectic mix of receivers. They got a big, tall guy that's really coming on for him, and they got a couple little shorter, faster guys, one of whom you guys played against a couple of years ago, number 85, Neblett.
Yep, they do. They have their quality all the way through. They have a couple of those big playmakers, but they're solid in quality all the way through in terms of their run game, pass game, O-line, tight ends. It's going to be a challenge for our defense. There's no question about it.
Defensively, I know you're really early in looking at them on the film. Do they remind you anybody within the league?
Montana, we just played them, in some ways, and I mean that out of absolute respect, because I have so much respect for the way Montana plays defense. But they start out a lot of 2 high shell stuff, and they can roll down into some 1 high, but more 4 down front than anything else, which is Montana's base. Defensive end, that's a guy, the way Wagaman, different than Wagaman, but that type of impact. And then veterans, maybe even a little more veteran than Montana's defense in terms of the number of games they've played and started, or played in, and you can see it the way they play. So they're not a high pressure outfit, but they're an aggressive, very good tackling team. That's one of the things I noticed. If I had to rank all the teams we've played, who tackles the best, they're right up there. If they're not the best, they're right up there as one of the best tackling teams we're going to face all year. So they do things right, and you got to give them a lot of credit. And there's a reason they're here, and you can see it. It's not by accident.
Should be a great game on Saturday. Coach, thanks for the time. Congratulations on a big win, and best of luck on Saturday.
Appreciate you having me. Thank you.
You betcha. That's head coach Beau Baldwin in our football podcast, brought to you by Cheney Federal Credit Union.